We're so lucky to have this guy. He is such a great analyst and authority when it comes to politics for so many years with us on the old station. And now he's come over to this new platform. Gary Dietrich, everybody. Hi, Gary.
Hey, good to be here, buddy. And listen, man, I am liking the merch behind you there. That is a good offering of merch.
Thank you, sir. You know, and this is just a sliver of it, a flavoring of it. I mean, this is the KGO in Exile T-shirt, which we should get for Gary, or maybe you'd be interested in a tote bag or a mug. They're mugs, and
hey, how about you can drop a mug on me, and I'll take it to the TV station. We'll infect TV world while we're at it.
I love that. I love that. All right, that's what we're going to do. We'll send you, John, please, if you would, get Gary's email and mailing address, and we'll send him something. I think
that's top John Daly, because I don't need people showing up at my front door trying to shove a registration card in my hand 63 times in the next 6 months. We'd like you to come to our side of the party or else. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You've got boy, they knocked on the wrong door when they knock on your house. Man, that is it's interesting to see how the Get Out the Vote movement has changed, and yet there is an old school quality to it, perhaps, that will always exist,
Well, I think people do underestimate, we call it the ground game in politics, Mark, and that is the GOTV effort. So they're basically conducted, for the most part, very similar to the way they were in the past. Many people may not realize, but when you go down to the your local county elections office, I can find out when you voted. Now, I can't find out how you voted, who you voted for, but you voted in 2016 or 2018 or whatever it is. And that's how campaigns generate their lists, their walking lists and their prompting lists to get people to turn out at the polls based on so-called likely voters. And so those lists are exceptionally important. They're procured by campaigns. You can get them. And then people go out and knock on doors or call people. Or now, I don't know about you, but I am getting all kinds of text messages. How? Yes. I don't know. And they prompt voters to get out to the polls. And then if you're really sophisticated in these operations, and I participated in this way back when working on a presidential campaign, voters are ID'd in advance. Well, are you a Biden supporter or a Trump supporter? Oh yeah, as a matter of fact, okay, boom. You get that check mark, and those are the people you really go after, of course, make sure they show up on election day.
If you have a question for Gary Dietrich, you can put it into the chat, and we will pass it along to him if there's time. I wanted to ask you about whether or not there'll be a GOP wave for real. But before you answer, I want to get your comments on something Michael Moore was saying over the weekend. I was going to play a little bit of that. And so I'd like you to remark on this, because he thinks the Democrats have the power to actually prevent any kind of red wave. But I want you to factor what he's saying into, at least address it into your remarks, if you would, please. So here's Michael Moore. So
another group that's going to show up in very large numbers are young people, young adults. Back in 2014, 15% of 18 to 29-year-olds showed up to vote in Michigan in the off-year election of 14. Just 4 years later, in 2018, that went from 15% of young people showing up to 32.2%. More than double in just 4 years showed up. And that trend has continued. Actually, it's really sort of started in Barack Obama's first election. Across the whole country, young people, the white 18 to 29-year-old vote was the only white demographic that Obama won in that first year. I know it's hard to believe, right? So how did he win? Well, he won because about 70% of the eligible voters in this country now are either women, people of color, or 18 to 35. Those are the three groups, or a combination of the three. A young black woman, for instance. So with that in mind, you think of 70% are the base, or the traditional base of the Democratic Party: women, people of color, young people. If we show up, this is ours. In the states where they ask you, are you a Democrat or Republican? When you register, you have to list the party. There are 20 million, and there's about 40 some states, 20 million more register as Democrats over Republicans. In 7 of the last 8 presidential elections, the popular vote has gone to the Democrat running for president. Only once in 34 years, since George I in 88. Only once since then has the Republican got the popular vote.
So you get the idea, Gary Dietrich, the idea somehow that there is this, there's an explosion of Democratic political gunpowder that can go off if those people show up. Your thoughts?
Well, yeah, Moore raises a couple of interesting things I think are worth touching on. Number one, I do think youth vote, that was documented, certainly during the Obama candidacy, went up. The question is it going to stay up for Joe Biden and for Democrats? That's a huge if. We really don't know that yet, Mark, but that has the potential to grow. But the youth vote has always had potential to grow. They have always been amongst some of the lowest turnout demographic. I would love, by the way, let me just say this across the board before I comment further on this. I would love for everybody to vote. I think engagement is exceptionally important. And when we don't have it, you have the kind of anarchist tendencies that never go well. So youth vote, will it stay up? Question mark. Secondly, he talked about the traditional, and that's the word I want to hit on there, the traditional base of the Democratic Party. He talked about people of color, women, young voters. Here's the thing. There are some clear trends right now in this election that show, just take the Hispanic vote, which is the most pronounced in this category I want to talk about. It's shifting. It's dramatically drifting. And this election cycle, amongst particularly Latinos, Hispanics, it has been drifting GOP. So there are some real question marks amongst Democrats themselves about how traditional is our traditional base. And there's going to be an awful lot of breakdown that happens after the midterms tomorrow, Mark, about going into 2024, who can we count on? So that's a big deal. And then last one I'll point out is this, and that is energy and turnout for this election. Now, there's been some interesting numbers just in the last week that has shown the sort of energy or the passion for turnout rising amongst Democrats and equaling that of Republicans, which it's been lagging behind for some time. That too is going to be very carefully watched, and watch for one county in particular that both parties right now have under the microscope, and that is one that's been watched for many, many election cycles, Miami-Dade County in Florida. Right now, I mean, Democrats, that has been a bastion. That's been their sort of, fortress in Florida to hold on to that state. Right now, the early numbers show more Republicans voting in Miami-Dade than Democrats. That would not bode well for Democrats in this cycle and in 2024.
The red wave, the Latino thing that you point to, you've underscored a couple of really key things. The Latino thing, as you were talking about, I was thinking, well, that offsets in a way, maybe in terms of numbers, the youth vote. Like even, I was just thinking about Michael Moore's kind of equation that he was laying out. It's really contingent on these pockets of traditionally Democratic support showing up. So if you grant that there'll be a big youth vote or a significant youth vote, but you lose a Latino vote, those things could zero out. I mean, again, you have to see, but in terms of trying to handicap it, you see how the Democratic Party has a tough hill to climb, notwithstanding that, they might have some advantages with pockets of people who may or may not show up. But I'm wondering what a even partial red wave would look like. You think the House would likely be the first place that the red wave would be manifested, right? That's almost a lead pipe cinch to
absolutely.
Go Republican.
Yeah, you historically speaking, it's the House that is always the trendsetter in these midterms, and that the numbers now, are very well parsed. If a president is above 50%, they're likely in a midterm, and they're sitting president, they're likely to lose X number of House seats. Below 50%, which of course where Biden is now, they're likely to lose X amount. And if you look at like the Real Clear Politics average, by the way, of what they think is going to be the red wave, so to speak, in the House, they peg it right now at 31 seats as the average amongst their polling that Republicans are likely to pick up. And that squares with history, by the way. So people that want to just totally diss Biden understand this is a long-standing trend for a number of decades. Let me say one other thing, if I could, Mark, about those Moore numbers. He talked about 20 million more Democrats registering than Republicans. What he doesn't mention that's exceptionally important, of course, is where they are registering. So if you have a large Democratic registration in California and New York, Well, that might provide you a bulwark for those states, and even the New York governor's race being closely watched now to see if a Republican for the first time in 20 years can win that state. But the problem is that you have to win state by state, right? So a U.S. Senate seat in, Wisconsin is not going to be at all impacted by big Democratic registration margins in Republican short states like California and New York. So that's important to keep in mind as well.
That's such a good point. And when you talk about congressional seats, that is to say in the House, you've got a gerrymandered world that has been aggressively and effectively. I mean, it is it's a way to ensure that your party does well. It's been aggressively gerrymandered on the GOP side. I think the Democrats have been, and based on what I've read, sort of less than effective in their gerrymandering. And they have the same chance to gerrymander in states that they control.
Well, I think one of the things that is going to be one of the hard woodshed lessons that's going to come out of this election for Democrats, if all the numbers, really all the trends continue to point towards the Republican wave of whatever size, is you've got to start at the bottom. What do I mean by that? Republicans started 10, 15 years ago because they were on this losing end of the stick for a long time, and including on this gerrymandering deal over the last election cycle. They said, wait a minute, we have got to begin to recruit candidates for state legislatures, because remember, it's state by state are how these seats are drawn, as they are in California, the House seats drawn by a California redistricting commission. So the key is you've got to control state legislatures and governorships. Republicans now control 30 of the 50. And again, going back to Real Clear Politics averages, they right now are predicting potentially a GOP pickup of 3 more governorships. That's exceptionally important. Again, it won't be affected again for another 10 years when we have the census in 2030, and then 2032, new districts will be drawn. But those things are key.
We're talking to Gary Dietrich, and here's a comment from Jim Avila. Dems not losing Latino vote. GOP increased a lot, but their percentage is so low it is irrelevant. Women. They will make the difference. They have registered greatly. It is true, Gary. This is a phenomenon. How do you see the vote from women factoring into the results?
Well, Jim and I, we can go back and forth about this. I'm not going to debate it. You can look at the conservative Latino, those identify themselves as conservative Latinos. They have clearly shifted over the last couple of election cycles. So that we know. Now, as far as women goes, I think the big question mark there is going to be, Mark, who are the women? Where are they voting? Suburban women have been sort of the swing vote in the female vote. Do they go towards GOP? Do they go towards Democrats? That has been a big question mark. And right now, in certain states, the GOP is polling better amongst women than they have in the past. Could that demographic still be a salvation for Democrats? That's going to be a big question mark. And right now, when you look at the polls across the country, Republicans, again, continue to do better than they have in the last couple of election cycles generically. When we break it down into the so-called tabs, as we call them, the tabulations of these polls, that's where the real parsing is going to be done for 2024, as people then begin to determine where do we put our resources, into what states and into what demographic categories within those states.
Longtime political analyst Gary Dietrich. 2 more points. I want to get in a moment to what government under GOP control would look like. But I want to put that to the side for a moment. I want to ask you another question, more fundamental. And that is, has the Democratic Party missed the messaging? And I understand they don't message nobody screams, I think, like the GOP. I mean, who could sell that election thing about how it was stolen? I mean, I can't believe it. But I mean, they sing from the same hymnal. It's the old line, Democrats fall in love, Republicans fall in line. It's they speak with such fervor about this thing that they obviously know is ridiculous. But that said, the messaging around the loss of democracy, and I see the loss of democracy as a real possibility. The idea that you could just by fiat throw out the results of an election, this kind of thing, and I see this as a real scenario that could be played out over multiple states in critical ways. But I don't know at this at moment in time, with inflation being pinching the way it is, and with they've effectively used, the GOP has this crime thing. Even though if you look at the statistic, they don't quite all bear it out. It's more of a feeling you have, that things are dangerous. I'm wondering if the loss of democracy is actually being heard as a priority item that gets you to vote a certain way, and it's clearly something that the Democrats have made a big deal out of. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, we even heard over the weekend, Mark, more Democratic voices, even on the so-called Sunday morning shows, saying that they feel like, and of course, Newsom has said some of this himself, our own governor here in California, the Democrats have missed the mark on messaging this election cycle. And, to some degree, I understand when things aren't going well in the economy, what do you say? I mean, when inflation is where it is, what do you say about it? But all the polls across the board have showed that you've got, when you ask voters generically, what's the most important thing to you? The economy / inflation is way up there. The most recent polls numbers are around 50%, drops way down after that. What's the second most important one? And this is one, of course, Democrats hung their hat on: abortion. That's down at 15%. And then you've got, concerns about democracy, et cetera, and the other ones in single digits. So there's just no denying the fact, and many Democrats themselves said, look, those things are important. They're really important, but you've got to tap in. And one Democratic strategist said on one of the shows yesterday, we didn't listen to the voters and what they were telling us. And that has got to change. So that's where we are. And a reminder to people, I don't have an axe to grind. I do not have a horse in this race. You know this, Mark. I am a strictly nonpartisan political analyst at this stage of my career. Hey, that's my training at the Kennedy School at Harvard, and I'm sticking to it. So that's what it is. And, I think there's going to be some important lessons learned from this. I certainly expect Democrats to rebound from this and to take a hard look at some of these numbers and some of these races that they lose. And there will clearly be a course correction, a sea change going into 24. I have no doubt about that.
I have a question for Gary, if I could. And I've been watching a bunch of national races, and I kind of know which ones I think, are going to be the ones to watch. But I'm wondering, on the California level, what do you think is the biggest statewide issue that we should be paying attention to in this race?
Well, I think some of them are at this point, Kim, that's a great question. We only have, by the way, this is interesting, we only have 7 propositions to vote on this time. I know this sounds crazy. That's the lowest number we voted on as Californians reportedly in over a century. Now, I haven't been voting for a century, but those are the numbers. So, and some of those are kind of foregone conclusions. Prop 1, the abortion constitutional amendment, that's passing by polling numbers by about 2/3. A lot of people felt like that was redundant anyway. It was already protected in our Constitution. The 2 big gambling initiatives, by the way, both going down in flames. One of them only has 20-something% support, the other 30% support. So those are likely to go down as well. So I don't think it's at the proposition level, which it often is, by the way. And we're going to see those come back, by the way, in the next election cycle or two. So
we'll see those propositions return, just like we've seen the kidney dialysis thing came back.
I can't get away from dialysis. It's like, how many times do we have to tell you no?
Yeah.
Well, this is the 3rd cycle, guys, that's there. Whether the SEIU union, the unions behind this does it again, I don't know. But the gambling thing, because when you're staring down $52 billion in 2021 in sports betting, they're going to be back. And there's already rumblings I'm hearing. They're already planning the campaigns for next time around. So, Kim, it's going to be, I'll tell you, there's one race that a lot of people are interested in. And I think this one is going to be worth watching. And that's for a relatively obscure statewide office in most people's minds, state controller, the Republican Lan Hee-chen, an Asian, a moderate Republican, worked on in 2 different administrations, both Democrat and Republican in Washington. People are wondering, can Republicans actually win a statewide race? There's been many papers that have actually endorsed him, and it's going to be very interesting to watch to see if he can break through the Democratic hegemony. And
hegemony, yes, very well done. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
You know what? I got to tell you guys a funny aside. This is hilarious. My yellow lab, I have to sequester during these interviews now because our doorbell, Mark, sounds exactly like your ding.
I love that. I love it. You're not alone.
I have to be careful. I have to either use my very small linguistic capabilities and not earn a ding, or I have to sequester Courage is his name, Otherwise, he will go off, and it's your fault, Mark. I want you to know that.
You're not alone. We had other listeners who have mentioned this as a problem. So,
okay.
Yeah, misery
So
loves
anyway,
company.
that, Kim, I think is the one state wide race to watch. And then there's also going to be some very interesting analysis about our congressional seats. I'll real quickly say, I mean, here's the president campaigning in a San Diego congressional seat last week to try to hold on for a Democrat down there. So, even in our own state, there's a battleground brewing for those congressional seats.
I only have another second with Gary Dietrich, but here's something from Murphy Rowan, who's a regular. Just reported this morning, Democratic-led Allegheny County in Pennsylvania probably throwing out thousands of mail-in ballots due to a date-entered glitch. I saw this as well, Gary. They claim that they didn't have the date written. It has to be handwritten on the outside of the return. It really is quite bizarre. Could you speak to that?
Well, votes are going to be challenged. I mean, look, the reality is the cake has now been baked that you're going to have, hordes of attorneys on both sides watching a lot of states, a lot of counties. And those are the kinds of things, Mark, this was debated in Pennsylvania last time. And there's going to be a lot of those kind of cases going forward that help determine the outcomes in some of these states. And court challenges are not going to be avoided.
And then finally, I'll leave you with this from Bee Cleaner. The economy is not the most important thing to me. The thing I want is no crazy people in office. More important than anything. Has the crazy quotient gone up a little bit, Gary Dietrich? You've been doing this a long time. Come on.
Well, I think certainly the vociferous nature of craziness has definitely gone up.
Vociferous. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Courage, for staying silent. The embattled nature of it, Mark, I don't think any question has gone up, and I don't see that fervor going away certainly anytime soon. But right now, what we need is a California proposition, a ballot measure. We have to have screening for crazies. That's what it has to be, right? A crazy screening test has to be passed before you can run for office.
Yeah, I do think you're right. There's always been loud, rancorous debate. Rancorous is a ding word too. But I think the reality is, Gary, there is a sense that the agenda and agenda items and what's being said on the stump nationwide, but it's also supported by individual candidates here in California. It's become a little detached from the reality. We've always spun facts in this country in the past. Politicians are famous for that, and punditry sort of supports them. But there does seem to be another level of denial about certain facts that it's of concern. So when somebody writes in, I want to keep the crazies out, yeah. But of course, crazy is always from where you sit. Is that sort of what you were hinting at before, right?
Well, yeah, my famous movie line related to crazy is Jack Nicholson opening his front door, hair all Jack Nicholson in his bathrobe. We don't need any more crazy. We're all filled up around here. And I think that's what probably a lot of people feel like.
He is so great to spend time with us and regularly stop through. We're going to get him some Mark merch, and we'll get that off to you, Gary Dietrich. And we look forward to your thoughts as the dust settles after tomorrow. We may not have a count until when, Gary?
Sometime. I mean, I want to remind people real quick, voting tip, you can turn in your mail-in ballot. It can be put in any postal box, clear up until Election Day tomorrow. You don't have to put a stamp on it, and that's the way to do it. If you want to vote in person, look in your local election guide in the front. There'll be local sites you can go to. Encourage people to vote. But Mark, it's going to be at least days, in some places potentially weeks, before we know some outcomes, if they're not overwhelming.
He is, as I say, our go-to guy. Gary Dietrich, everybody. Thanks, Gary.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.